Welcome back, Spiritual Misfits. I've got two of my favorite people on the screen, Mitchell Forbes and Carolyn Mears. Welcome, my friends.
Hey there,
Thank
Will.
you.
Hey there, Caro.
Hey, good to be here with you both.
Likewise.
So good. We just podcast for an excuse to hang out. And hopefully, if you're listening, you feel a little bit like you're hanging out with us, because I think hanging out with you guys is just delightful. And I hope other people feel that way too. So we are going to do a roundtable episode, and we've got a couple of questions from our Facebook group, and we'll see how we go with those. Some of them might require coming back to in later episodes with other guests. I think some of them are a bit meatier than we might be able to cover just on the fly. But if we run out of steam on those, I have myself a juicy line of questions that I would have popped in there. So now people will no doubt want to listen at least until I reveal that. Although I might have made the episode title some like clickbait around that topic. So we'll see. Anyway, shall we
I'll
just get
still
into
want to
it?
wait till we get to it, so it'll still have the same effect. They'll be like, hang on, they haven't spoken about that yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, first of all, Caro, tell us about the Spiritual Misfits listener survey.
Yes, I'm so glad you remembered, Will, because it had slipped my mind, but it shouldn't have, because we are just putting out probably this week a listener survey where we want to hear from you. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear where you're coming from. We want to hear how you listen, a few different things about you. And all of this is to help us shape some really interesting things that are expanding in this Spiritual Misfits universe in the future. So we are wanting your input to help us as we dream and imagine and explore what's happening next. So you can find the link to that survey.
It'll be in the show notes. We'll pop it in the show notes.
In the show notes. I don't know if it'll be on the website, but it'll be somewhere. So you can, if you can give us like 5 minutes of your time beyond listening to just fill that out, we would really appreciate that. And it will go a long way to helping us.
Yes.
Do some really good things.
And on that note, we do occasionally send out a newsletter. With Caro on board, maybe it'll be sent out slightly more than my... I'll tell you what, I'm good at putting out a weekly podcast episode, but that means that some of my other commitments are a little bit more just fast and loose.
Haphazard.
But if you want to be on the mailing list, as it increases in consistency, regularity, and quality, and we'll have links to surveys and other good stuff, just go to spiritualmisfits.com.au, pop your email in. You know what? Sometimes you give your email to an organization, a company, a business, and they just smash you. And you're like, this was the worst decision ever to subscribe to this. It's not like that with the Spiritual Misfits one. It's like, oh, I forgot I signed up for this because they haven't emailed me in a while. So no spam, promise, but do join the mailing list.
We would love that. Yes, do that.
Yes. Okay. Very good. All right. So we put it to the Facebook group. We wanted to crowdsource some questions. And the first comment was from Katie, something around the ethics of choosing to/not to have children with the world in its current state. And then Jacob said, good question. So it's not just Katie thinking about this one. And then Jason jumped in and shared an article that was kind of loosely in that realm. So this is an interesting question. I do immediately think about how each of us have 3 kids. So if
doing our part,
we've added more than
Answer this question.
Is it 2.7 or something that is like the replication rate that you need in order to like replace you and then people that die prematurely or something in order for the population to continue?
Wouldn't it just be 2? Because
No,
it
because
takes 2
some
people to
don't
make
have
a kid, and
kids.
then you just make.
No.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Some people don't have kids, and then like other people die early, and like all that kind of. I don't know if it's 2.7, but it's over 2. Yeah, which apparently like virtually no country in the world has. Like
because
like,
are they under now?
Under,
or
yeah,
over?
almost everything's under. Like I think we're getting close to peak people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I've listened to podcasts talk about how that's a problem, which
Heaps.
doesn't quite make sense in my logic brain when you think about the climate, because you think, oh yeah, okay, so maybe we've hit peak if we just come down a bit. Isn't that good? But there's all this economic stuff around why that really isn't good. So I don't know if that's just the myth of progress, though. Like, we do live in that world where the myth of progress is like it's always bigger, better, more. And do we just have that paradigm for people? I don't know.
I think, I mean, yeah, I mean, like intuitively, you think to yourself, like we're absolutely destroying the planet through, through not
Just
through
existing.
overpopulation, but just through existing as humans and the kind of consumption that we have. So you think to yourself, it would be better to have less. And I think maybe as like a meta point, that's probably true. But the kind of catastrophe that comes when you have an aging population, for example, as opposed to a young population in terms of social welfare, the ability to kind of like get stuff done and like create infrastructure, apparently is terrifying, right? Which is why like Australia relies so heavily on immigration, because our replication rate is so bad, and you need to import people to do particular jobs, but even just to like pay taxes and all that kind of stuff, right? So the idea of like a welfare state in inverted commas, or a state that's able to take care of people, almost relies on us having kids, which I think does kind of get to that part of that question, right? Like people are terrified about the drop in birth rates for that very reason.
Yeah. So interestingly, I think it was in the 70s, there was this big fear, and they called it the baby bomb. And this was like an existential worry. And the projection at the time was that 8 billion would be too many humans for the planet to sustain. And it sounded like the maths on paper looked very, logical and reasonable. I mean, do your research, people. I don't know who the guy was, but
it's
I'm
like a
familiar
pub
with
chat.
the rough details.
We're just
That's
talking.
right.
We're not
Fact check me.
No,
I'm not a guru.
no
not an
footnotes.
expert.
No footnotes. Just talking.
Anyway, that was a big fear, and we've now passed 8 billion. And one of the things that happened in that time was a big shift in how agricultural practices kind of happened, and the way that large scale farming happens. So that's its own environmental thing. But you're right that now the fear, like there was a fear of the overpopulation, and now the trending fear, at least in some circles, is underpopulation, and that we won't be able to sustain. Yeah. So can I just ask you guys, on a personal level, did you ever consider this in terms of your family planning? Was there ever a moment where it was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't bring a child into the world, either for the sake of the child, because you're like, oh, what's the future going to be like, or for the sake of the world, because you're like, my kid's gonna ruin the planet?
I didn't. That never crossed my mind, to be honest. And yeah, I don't know. I think I have a pretty like strangely positive outlook on things. Like when I hear people talk about that, I'm like, yeah, she'll be right. That sort of just tends to be my general posture towards most things in the world. Like even that's my posture to parenting. Oh, you fell over. Oh, your bone's a bit sore. Oh, she'll probably be right. Like I'll get you to the hospital in 3 days' time if it's still sore. I have a default like we're all good kind of like approach to life. Don't know, it never crossed my mind. Maybe it should have. But yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm optimistic that as I'm sober-minded as well. I know there's crisis coming, but I also wonder what ingenuity and creativity that's going to birth out of humanity. But then maybe that's me assuming we can fix our own problems, and I don't know.
Well, to slightly complicate the picture, because the picture is always a bit more complicated than we think it is. We do live in a time where we constantly feel like things are going horribly wrong. And yet actually the outcomes for humans around the world in so many kind of measures, as far as health, life expectancy, education, immunizations, we're living in the best time there has ever been to be alive in many ways.
Well, there's almost never been a better time to be a woman, for example, like than the time we're living in at the moment. Like the kind of freedom and flexibility, I mean, just like the invention of reliable birth control really changes the game, right? Like it affords a kind of freedom.
Some ways to go, but
not saying we don't, but it's
absolutely. And like I'm not saying like it's genuinely hard for people to hold these things at once. On the one hand, we do live in what you could make a very strong case that this is the best time ever to be born, to be alive, that humans have done an incredible job of kind of rolling out better outcomes. However, that does exist within a world where we are more aware than ever of the atrocities around the world, and our capacity to increase like the scale of those atrocities in terms of the kind of weaponry that there is around the world. You know, the harm that can be done today also has particular edges in terms of the progress of harm. So it's complicated.
It is. And, you know, we're all talking from a very privileged position in Australia. Well, probably anyone who lives in Australia has a pretty privileged position in the world in terms of like, health and wealth and safety. Like we're not communicating from a war zone or any kind of major upheaval. Yeah, we got to hold that, I suppose, as we talk to.
Yes.
I mean, I think like in some of the most like tricky places to live in the world is where people have the most kids, right? Like, and it's seen as like it is just part of your culture, like what you do, right? Like it's not even a question as to whether or not you have kids. It is the greatest gift that you could possibly give the world and your family is to kind of have a kid, and they're in some of the most like difficult, like far more difficult situations than we would. Like this conversation does seem to be one that is had in kind of those privileged circles, like not in the other, not outside of them. So it is kind of, it's weird in that sense. I just don't know what, like, given that thing we were talking about before, like the like population growth is kind of important at least in our current economic structures, right? But even what you were saying, Cara, it reminds me of Marilyn Robinson's point, this faith in humanity, like humanity's goodness and creativity to be able to like to sort itself out or to find a way even in the midst of struggle. And it's not naive, like it's like, yeah, things could get so much worse than they are now, but you still need humans to try to kind of chart a way forward together. So I don't know what would be achieved by not having kids. I guess like you think about your own kids and you're like, I don't want them to grow up in that kind of world. But then there seems to be this kind of, I don't know, is it a selfishness? Maybe not really, because you're thinking about your kids, but also they could be the ones who are contributing to fixing this mess, you know, or to like
that's part of what I
little
think about with this.
of hope and grace and love and peace and forgiveness and all that kind of stuff.
Imagine if Greta Thunberg's parents were like, nope, we're not having kids. I mean, would that have been a net gain for the climate crisis? You know, it's a weird question because it's kind of made out like it's a simple equation. Have a kid, bad for the planet. Don't have a kid, good for the planet. I don't think it's the same as a lot of other environmental choices that are a little bit more clear cut. Like there are other ways you can reduce your carbon emissions that, you know, it's fairly clear cut that using renewable energies, putting solar panels on your roof, walking instead of driving where you can, like, you know, it's a bit more clear cut. But on the children thing, you just don't know like what your child is going to be, how you will raise them, how they will be a contributor to the future. But even if they're not, you know, I think a bit like what you were saying, Mitch, like it raises like some cultural questions around how we understand children. Are they just little units of productivity or
consumption? Yeah.
Or is there a sense in which, and I know not everyone has children and this can be a sensitive conversation, but I just wonder, like, is there a sense that part of what it means to be human is to be able to potentially explore, you know, having children? Is that almost a human right? I know that it's complicated, but do you know what I mean? Like, there's something about like bringing children into the world is just, it's not like a decision that sits on a ledger about good or bad. It's about, this part of what it means to be human. We create families. We, you know, we multiply, not just because we're calculating. I mean, you can ask, like, it's the same as kind of asking, like, will kids make you happier or will they make you poorer? Or will they mean that you write one less novel? Like, these are all the things that people talk about when it comes to children. It's like, is that the frame to think about this kind of question? Or is that just totally like missing what's at the heart of?
It'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this, Caro, but I think it is a great thing that we have reliable birth, like contraception, right? So that like people can choose not to have kids and then still have like a fulfilling heterosexual, if you want to have a heterosexual sexual relationship, right? Like that is a great thing. It does cause a whole bunch of agony for people too. Like I know at least maybe, I was going to say half a dozen of my friends, but maybe not that many, who just agonize about when to have kids, which wasn't a question that many people really had to think about. Like it was just a constant risk for like in other times of history, right? Like it's a real strange thing to sit around and go, oh, hang on, like will I or won't I? the only reliable way to do that in previous generations is not to have a heterosexual sexual relationship, right? Because that's the thing that brings about kids. So it's a really strange thing to be wrestling with.
Mm.
The option is, you are infertile, I suppose, and there's not much you can do about that, or you're a nun. Like, that's kind of like they're the two reliable ways to make sure that you don't have kids. So there is a weird kind of privilege to sit around and go, oh, I wonder, like, should I, shouldn't I, or when do I do this? Does it suit me? Will it suit the world, or whatever? Like, that's all because of some kind of technological advancement. But it's great. I love that technological advancement. It creates a kind of freedom that otherwise you don't have, But it also is stressful for people. Caro,
Well, I just think about, I guess I'm thinking about the people who are wrestling with this question, like, should I have kids? And my feeling, again, we're just on a podcast and none of us know the intricate ins and outs of someone's story, but I don't think it's good for any of us to make decisions based on fear. And so if it's fear that's driving the worry about having kids, I think there's just some curiosity and exploration to do in that space for each of us when fear drives us. But I also want to say, like, in the same way that some people feel called to be celibate, but most people, have, a relationship with an intimate relationship with another human being. Like, maybe there are just some people who feel called not to have kids. And but I do think that most people probably feel that maternal or paternal desire to have a family. And so I think if you are like listening to this and thinking, oh, I don't know if I want to have kids, I'd be like, really explore that with someone you trust, because it would be really interesting to get down to the essence of, is this a calling that you're feeling is alive in you, or are there some other things driving the question? Because that, whatever it is, like being curious about what's going on inside of us is just a really healthy human thing to do. And same if you're like driven to have kids, I have some curiosity about that, because lots of people have kids thinking that it's going to fulfill something in them. And that's a problem in itself. So
yeah, that's right. I think what I don't like the idea of someone feeling ashamed or guilty about bringing a child into the world. That if they have a desire to have children, but then they feel like I'm doing some ethical wrong by doing that. So here's a little anecdote. When I was a youth leader many years ago, there was a very passionate young guy in my church who was just on fire for God. And he became so pumped up in his faith. And then he went to uni. He discovered like Bart Ehrman and, like some people like the little atheist club at uni got into him, and he swung hardcore into the like lefty atheist rejection of all, like new atheist kind of movement. Anyway, a couple of years go past. I have my first child. And this young person, who at one stage had just been so passionate about his faith, literally commented on my post where we had our kid saying, how dare you bring a child into this world with your ethical, your focus on trying to live a good life. Like, he was basically trying to take down Christians at that point. And he made a public comment about my decision to have kids in a world where there's so many children starving. And he said, like, it would have been more ethical for you to adopt, or rah, rah, rah. Now, it was very bad. Just like he just misread the room. Like, if you want to, raise some of those concerns, maybe don't do it in a Facebook post. And I think he was a personality that just had gone to the extremes. Yeah. But that was like a real world moment of going like, whoa, someone actually wants me to feel guilty in the early days of meeting my new child. The miracle of life has arrived, and that's somebody's lens for whatever reason. And, I'm not saying like, man, we got some really complicated challenges to deal with as team humanity. Yeah, we need more people to adopt. And yeah, for sure, for some people, having children is not a good decision for, their personality, life stage, whatever, their ability to cope with the responsibilities of parenting. So it's not loose. It should always be a decision made with a lot of gravity. But yeah, I think if there are people that feel like somehow they're doing some moral wrong by having children when they want to, I'm not there personally, if that makes sense.
There are those there's some serious kind of anti-natalists around, right? Like it's almost like a philosophical school, the immorality of like having kids based on blah blah blah, all the different things, right? So like there is like this kind of an interesting, what would you say, like philosophical, like philosophy 101 discussion to have around. I wonder whether or not whether or not we should be having kids, and like you can play with all the different contingencies, right? But I think like both of you said, and maybe you were saying particularly Caro, like most people just have, like, it is like a biological compulsion. Like it's part of our evolutionary history is that we want to reproduce, and we see that there's something good about that. But then more than that, like, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but I think kids are the most kind of the greatest moral and ethical education that you will ever get, or the greatest window into like who you are when your kind of ego is stripped away. There's like a self-discovery that happens when you have when you're put in that kind of position, right, where you have to show a kind of selflessness. Like you're taught just how vulnerable we all begin and how vulnerable we really all are, like forever, by you never really grow out of that completely. So I don't know, I feel like there's something that you learn uniquely by caring for kids. Now you can do that with adoption and all that kind of stuff. That's fine, like make a case for that. Although I do have this friend who's like part of like an anti-adoption. He's an adopted guy, but who's part of like a movement who's just really against adoption because he's felt how it has been misused in the past, like how his mum was pressured into giving him up, and how like the kind of the reverberations in his life to do with that, right? So he's just part of this movement that's trying to put way more limitations on adoptions for that kind of reason. So like, there's ethical complexities in all the different like arms of this kind of stuff that you have to navigate. But again, most people aren't sitting around thinking about that. They're just like, I met someone I love, I've always wanted to have a family, I'm going to have a family. So yeah, just stop being a dick about it. If you're that kind of person. I don't know if anyone is that kind of person, but just let people do their thing.
On there was an article that Jason in the Facebook group shared that was kind of listing off different things you could do that would have an impact on carbon emissions. And the way that it's worded in the article is have one less child, which is kind of a nice like way of just saying, well, maybe don't completely not have them, but just have one less. But I just think it's funny because I'm always making a decision to have one less child than I have. So I'm doing that one.
I like that.
I was going to have 8, but I had 7. So I'm doing my bit.
Yeah, I've actually had 6 less children than what I would have had just for the environment. Again, I think that goes back to like how we opened though, right? Like there is a flow-on effect for having one less child. Like our whole kind of system is propped up by a young population, and if you're not birthing them, you have to import them from somewhere. But if you're importing them from somewhere, you are taking them away from their place as well, which has flow-on effects for there, and so they would need to be replicating. So it's like they're in a globalized kind of world and economy. Like someone's paying the cost for not having a whole bunch of young people around to pay taxes and to help with infrastructure. Like that just seems like a no-brainer in a sense. So it may be good for the environment long term, but the catastrophe, like the cliff that you have to fall off, may be worse than than not doing it. I'm no expert on this. This is just stuff that I like. I'm not saying that is literally what will happen, but that seems like something that you would have to factor in, right?
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Other couple of questions we got here. Susanna says, listening to Uncle Ray on last week's podcast episode, she says, but I'm no longer sure. She's loving the conversation with Uncle Ray, but I'm no longer sure about the atonement theory discussed around 15 minutes in that says he bore that terrible abuse for our sins. I think this is less about Uncle Ray's talk and just he said something that made her think about atonement theory. But she then says, this belief that we all know so well goes on to say that the Father took out his wrath on his Son for us. I've been listening to pods that refer to a non-violent atonement, wondering what others are thinking. Short answer here is we have done quite a few episodes that have talked about non-violent atonement theories. Me and Mitch did one of our Easter episodes was about atonement. And Bradley Jersak has been on the pod, who obviously is just brilliant at this. So I'm kind of just going to point people towards those, unless you guys have any other just quick bites for that one.
I haven't listened to the episode, but what was is that a quote from Uncle Ray? Like he took that terrible abuse for us? Like, is that a quote from the episode, or is that just
he bore that terrible abuse for our sins?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the direct quote. I kind of hear that And I think I have ways of interpreting that even with a non-violent atonement theory, right? Because I'm like, yeah, who crucified Jesus? Humans, the broken systems of empire and religious authority and power.
So he's taking the wrath of empire and the wrath
So
of
yeah,
human
I'm
beings.
saying
Like that's
that
a scapegoaty type thing.
yes, whether or not you hyperlink that phrase to penal substitutionary atonement or something else, I think that phrase can be interpreted in ways that make sense with or without a violent or non-violent atonement theory. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I remember reading Thomas Merton for the first time, right? And I can't remember what book it was, but whatever book I was reading, he kept talking about the glory of God, right? It came up so much. Like it was like God's glory and God's holiness. And I'd only ever heard John Piper talk about that. So it was so jarring as I was listening to it. I was like, what the hell? Thomas Merton believes that, God does all this horrible stuff for his glory? Or like God's holy, and it made me feel like very uncomfortable. And then I realized, I was like, oh, hang on. That's not what Thomas Merton means. And that's not what this has always meant. This is kind of John Piper's take. And so there was a whole bunch of unlearning that I had to do about that language to make me feel more comfortable about it. But the problem wasn't with the language. The problem was with the way that it's been used. And so you can kind of recover that language as precious. And now, like, what is it? The glory of God is the glory of God is a human being fully alive, which is the old kind of statement. So you can recover that language was so destructive to me, but then it's become so precious because I've understood it in a kind of slightly different way. So I wonder whether maybe that's part of the way to a less reactionary kind of like response to this stuff is to go, okay, hang on, that language is part of the tradition for some reason. What is it? What is the best of that tradition that I can recover rather than trying to get rid of it, maybe. I don't know. Maybe there's something there. Rowan Williams, like in his book on atonement, he does this interesting thing that I didn't really like until recently. I've come around to it a little bit, but he kind of goes like, look, penal substitutionary atonement is like a potential, like there's parts of the scripture that use that as a potential image for what's happening on the cross, right? It's not definitely, but potentially that's kind of what it's saying. And he kind of like made out, and I haven't read it for ages, so I hope I understood it right. But he kind of made out for him that's fine as long as it's a metaphor. Like, so you can't really imagine that God is angry at Jesus, right? That's what's happening. That God is wrathful, and like literally God's wrath is coming upon Jesus. But he's like, if it's kind of a metaphor, like so for like, in the kind of context of, if God needed to punish sins, he would punish himself rather than punishing us. Like he was kind of making room for that kind of thing as, again, not as something that's literal, but as a metaphor for like what God would do in, maybe a case study or something, what God would do in that situation. I may be slaughtering that and I can't really remember. But I remember reading it and going, oh, I don't even want it to be a metaphor. That seems like horrible. But then recently I've gone, oh, maybe I can see what he's saying there,
Caro, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that what you said, Mitch, about language being triggering is a really real thing for many of us who have been rethinking our faith. And yeah, I think when it comes to atonement theories, I think that the cross is like a diamond you can just view from a million different lenses. And there's a lot of different metaphors and ideas that are kind of there in scripture, and some of them are kind of fleshed out a bit more than others, and then some of them historically have been used more than others. But there's so much, like if you want to look at atonement theories or the cross or what it was that God in Christ was doing, that like there's so much creativity and goodness in there. And I think it's just always a good thing to notice when we have something come to us. It's like, oh, like, and sometimes it's someone using language that might feel old and triggering for us, but they're reusing it in a new way, or just that sometimes there's space. I don't know. I just want to acknowledge that, I suppose, that there's a real diversity of views here, and you'll probably hear different things on this podcast every now and then, and yeah, just the way it is.
Yeah.
I do think there's something like, have you guys read the Cross and the Lynching Tree, James Cone's book on like, I mean, it kind of starts by trying to explain, or the whole book is trying to explain why the cross is such an essential image for African American folk and like for enslaved people and stuff like that, right? And so he plays with that, which I think is awesome. But there is something about the experience, and I imagine this is like Uncle Ray, right? The experience of being like an enslaved, colonized people that is just acquainted with violence in a way that we're not. And it's far more comfortable with kind of violent imagery, and there's even like something about it that you don't want to pretend like it doesn't exist, but you want to go to the heart of it and see that there's something in it that can be kind of redeemed or transformed. I'm not the right person to be talking about this, but that's when I read The Cross and the Lynching Tree, I was like, oh wow, there is a deep connection there, because these are people who are acquainted with violence, being on the other end of violence. So whatever Uncle Ray was saying, you would want to take it very, very seriously, right? And not dismiss it, and not imagine that. I haven't listened to the episode, I'll be honest, but you would want to take that very seriously and listen deeply to what he's saying, even if it seems like some kind of theological idea that you've left behind. You don't want to dismiss that, because this is coming from someone who has a lived experience that is way closer to what Jesus experienced, than potentially ours. So that would be my specifics of whatever it is he said. Like, I would want to listen deeply to that and go, okay, what's going on here, and what can I see, and what can I learn about the cross from someone who maybe gets it better than I do.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing, is you look at the context of the person who's saying the phrase, and I think with Uncle Ray, there's so many aspects of a First Nations theology as a whole worldview that are very different to the sort of way that we have interpreted those ideas and phrases in Western theology. And I look at even the whole message that Uncle Ray, that was an excerpt from, and he's so big on, the reconciliation of all things, and God's love of creation that moves in. So I think that's the other thing. It's always with a phrase, if it is something that is triggering or challenging to you, as much as possible, like you said with the John Piper thing, it's like, try to go, okay, maybe I've heard this in certain contexts or out of certain mouths that have added to my sensitivity around this phrase or this doctrine, but maybe this person who's using it, they're actually coming from a totally different frame of reference, and there might be something to discover here that is rich and deep and beautiful.
It's probably a temperament that's worth like fostering in all of us towards like all people, right? Like, is to try to imagine that they're saying something that is interesting and that, it's worth hearing. It's not really easy. Like, I imagine doing that with my conservative evangelical friends at the moment. And I'm like, oh my gosh, do I really have to do that? Like, I don't really want to pay attention to what you're saying, because mostly it's annoying. But that posture is probably never going to be a bad one, right?
I agree. Yuhan says something on thought-stopping church cliches and ways around them. For example, we're all hypocrites, in response to people pointing out damaging hypocrisy in church spaces, or God's ways are higher than ours when questioning God's morality, stuff like that. Which I think is an interesting, it's true that in churches and probably in various different forms of human community, there are these kind of thought-stopping cliche statements that stop us from being curious and entering into a bigger conversation and taking seriously somebody's concern, whether it's about hypocrisy or a moral issue. Yeah. How do you guys respond to these days, or what are your thoughts?
My initial thought would be something along the lines of, it really depends who's saying the cliche, right? Like, if you have some person who's just lost someone really close to them and they're like, God's ways are higher than our ways, you're not going to be like, thought-stopping cliche, jerk, like, take that back. Like, you probably think to yourself, like, so many people are trying to navigate such tricky situations. Like, maybe that's the idea that is so precious to them that's helping them get past this really difficult thing, right? And you want to allow them,
What if it's the other way around, Mitch? What if the person who's lost something
is being told,
has the other person telling them?
No, that's exactly where I was going, right? So it depends who's saying it to you. So if you have a minister saying that kind of stuff, I would just leave that church, because they're obviously stupid. Not stupid. They're not doing the hard work to show you why you could be able to make a statement like that. But I have so much empathy for any kind of individual Christian who just believes that stuff because they don't have the time to sit around and believe something else, right? Or it just works for them, or it helps them navigate like some really difficult kind of, you know, situation. Like, I don't know, like, what are you gonna, are you like, you're not gonna are you really gonna go to that person and like try to help them see that thing, you know, to take that little bit of hope away from them, you know, like, you know, imagine they believe that they're going to see their child in heaven or something, and you're like, well, I'm not even sure if heaven exists, like, you know, like that would just be so stupid. But yeah, but if it's the other way around, then sure, like,
Yeah, is
you know,
the person
wanna...
using that phrase as a coping mechanism, or are they using it to keep the status quo, to protect their own power, perhaps? Like, they're very different situations.
Definitely. Caro?
Yeah, I would think, like, you know, it's helped me to build the art of translation in my life. And what I mean by that is, if it's someone who I know loves and cares for me, but they say something that's insensitive to the current position I'm in, I've done the work to go, translation, I care for you and I don't know what to say. Or translation, I'm, you know, like, sometimes people just say the wrong thing, but I think if it is someone who loves and cares for you, it helps to have a translation thing, which is like, okay, this person's trying to say something. Maybe all they've got is the cliche and they're saying it, and maybe I can receive that as care, even if the words are clunky and unhelpful. But if it is like in a different context of, like, yeah, in a group context or coming from a platform, or I think there's a thing in evangelical and modern Christian culture where we've been so trained to believe the things that come out of preachers and leaders' mouths. Like, it's almost like it's like the whole honor system that's present in the charismatic world and has pieces in other places. But I think all of us need to really build the, like, like, that's not right. Like, to actually be able to sit in front of someone who's, you know, has a position of influence or authority, or may speak on behalf of God or the Bible or some theological college or whatever, but have that thing where it's like, nah, I'm not going to take that today. Like, actually be able to just go, I'm going to put that to the side because it's not for me. I think we all need to build that a bit, not to be disrespectful of people's position or resource or whatever they're doing, but just actually to have some agency in our own thinking around the stuff that's said in churches and from pulpits, and just be like, nah, that's not for me. So.
Yeah. I think there's an element too of, like, you know, depending on if it's a one-on-one conversation or somebody saying something from a platform might be a bit different. But is there an opportunity if somebody says something like that for you to say, I actually don't see it that way anymore? Can I share why? And if the person is open to a conversation, you might show them why a phrase that has just rolled off their tongue for years is not that helpful or pastoral or compassionate, or they will double down and you might discover, actually, this is not a space to even have that conversation. And that confirms that maybe I won't have that conversation here. And I'll find somewhere else where I can have more fruitful, curious conversation. But, you know, that's the thing, is like, some people will say that thing in a fairly innocent way and be willing to have a curious conversation about it. Other people will say it in a defensive way, where if you challenge them, it might be end of story. But I guess we've kind of been saying this with the last thing, wherever possible. I know it's not always easy, but can you respond to the human who is saying this thing with a level of, you know, seeking a good faith engagement that might actually be better for everyone if it goes the best way possible?
I mean, Marilyn Robertson has this, again, to quote my favorite, she has this idea in one of her essays where she's talking about the way that people talk about the will of God, right? You know, it's the will of God. And she says basically, like, that's shorthand to say we have no real understanding of what time is, and we have no real great understanding of causality, why things happen the way that they do, right? So she's like, because these two things are a mystery to us, people then default to this particular phrase, which is, it's the will of God. And it's a way of going, there is a givenness to the way things turn out, and we have no idea why, right? And when she says it, it just sounds so compelling. And I'm like, oh, I'm with you on that idea. A way of kind of going, there is a mystery to why things happen the way that they do. And I trust that there is God in the midst of that somehow, right? I think there is like maybe there's like an honesty to that kind of statement that we don't quite realize. So just to take I know it's a specific example rather than taking the more broad thing, but that idea that God's ways are higher than our ways, there is like a truth to that. You know, like when you see it in that kind of way that Marilyn Robbins saying. So it's not something that needs correcting. It might not be something that's super well thought by the individual because they just don't have time to sit around thinking about it. They just intuit that there's got to be something better going on here because like God is more good than, you know, than I can imagine in this one situation, right? So they've taken this leap to a place that seems really ridiculous, but it actually doesn't have like a terrible ground, really. They just don't know how you could possibly get there. Do you know? That's a very specific example, but can you see what I'm trying to say, maybe? So that person I don't think needs correcting, you know, like maybe, but there'd be other examples that maybe they do. But
the idea of it being a thought-stopping cliche to me makes me think it's not just this it's when these statements are used to shut down a line of questioning.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I think that's the difference, helpful. Right? Somebody might say one of these things that we think is a little bit dumb, but they say it in the context of they're building an argument in a sermon or something. Whereas you might open up to somebody about something difficult and challenging, and then they say, or you might say, I'm really struggling with the hypocrisy of the church. You know, we need to change some leadership structures around here. And then if someone says, well, we're all just hypocrites, then they're shutting down a good faith interaction.
So it's the intention of, it's kind of, well, maybe not the intention, but the consequence of you saying it more than the thing that you're saying in and of itself, right?
Yeah. Is that phrase used to shut down a conversation?
Yeah, okay. But yeah, well, we could have saved ourselves like 20 minutes and just gone, that's terrible.
Yeah.
I retract everything that I said. It's just terrible. If you're using that to shut down a conversation, you shouldn't be doing that. Yeah.
No, that's good.
These are the questions we got in the Facebook group.
Yep. Bill, hit us up. What's your burning question?
Will's juicy question. All right. I feel like we now only have enough time left that I'm like, we need to do a whole other episode on this topic because I'm sort of
just intro. Is 45 minutes enough for an ep? Just intro it and we can come back and have another chat.
We'll tease. Yeah, we'll tease it. We'll tease it and then we'll come back.
Tease it a bit. Okay.
We'll see how people react if they listen to this and they're like, oh, that was a terrible idea. Or they're like, please give us more. Guys, I just got to ask you a question before we get into this topic. My question is, are you a believer?
In Justin Bieber?
Yeah, I didn't really like his halftime performance at the World Cup. Look, prior to that, I thought he was all right. Yeah.
I did see somebody post about how courageous it was for Justin Bieber to sing Hallelujah at the World Cup. And I was like, it's not courage. He's just a celebrity. Everybody loves him. He can say whatever he wants. And there's nothing controversial about singing an acoustic song with the word Hallelujah in it. Man, that's, yeah. Okay. To finish my question.
All those celebrities that are like, I thank God for my Oscar, they're super brave as well. Like really
super brave.
Like mentioning God. Oh my gosh. Like, yeah.
Guys, are you a believer in extraterrestrial life, aliens, life beyond us? Okay, this is my entryway into the topic.
Do you mean like amoebas on another planet? Or are you like fully intelligent, walking, humanoid, rock people, like whatever?
Well,
or anything.
Doesn't matter because let's say there are amoebas on another planet and that planet has the conditions for life. They'll evolve eventually. But, you know, does your gut, I do have more, there's sub-questions here, but I just thought just a juicy way to introduce the topic is just find out who's crazy or not, or who's I'm agnostic. Who's all in. Yeah. Mitch, you a believer in aliens?
What's the alienist? I'm not an alienist, but I'm just agnostic.
Alienist, yeah. I know a lot of clever people who would say, given the vastness of the universe, it is extremely, extremely unlikely that we are the only intelligent life forms that exist, you know, in the known cosmos, or not even in the known cosmos, in the actual kind of cosmos. Like that would be a very unlikely scenario, is what a lot of intelligent scientists and philosophers would say. I listened to a podcast just in preparation for this, and both the people on there, they say, look, odds are probably 50-50 that there's intelligent life forms. And they said the odds of us having encountered them, they would put a little bit lower than 50-50. But I'm sure we'll get into that, Will. But yeah, this is the vibe. So I'm outsourcing my answer to other people, which is what I often do.
It's funny, isn't it, that if you say, there's still probably a bit of a stigma with saying that you believe in aliens, even though it's actually scientifically a very reasonable position to hold, just in terms of like statistical chances. But there is probably a little bit of like, oh, you believe in aliens, you crazy person. I'm agnostic, but I also would lean in the side of like, I think probably it's pretty likely that in the scale of the universe, there are other life forms, maybe other civilizations out there. I don't know. But I think this is an interesting question for multiple reasons. And I'm just going to quickly just do some sketching out of why this might lead us to other episodes. Okay, so separate to aliens, you've got UFOs, or now they're sometimes called UAPs. I don't know what that actually stands for.
I
Yep.
did hear someone say this before. What is that?
Unidentified aerial projections or something. Projectiles, maybe.
We need one of those. This is so easy. UAP.
Does someone have that thing, the internet? What's a UAP?
Unidentified anomalous phenomena.
Unidentified anomalous phenomena. Okay,
So that could be a crop circle?
This says the older version is unidentified aerial phenomena.
This is specifically...
What?
This is something...
Have you heard of USOs? Unidentified submerged objects? So apparently, this is quite common as well for people to be kind of like...
aliens in the ocean?
Yeah, apparently. Like they see the same kind of thing, like lights, like flashing lights and blah, blah, blah.
We're not at aliens yet. We're not at aliens yet.
Sorry.
That's why I'm doing some groundwork.
UFOs,
because...
you're right. There is a grammatical difference there.
So the reason why I make this point is there is actually like quite a resurgence of interest and activity around what I call UFOs or UAPs. And for many, many years, in many places, people have seen things in the sky that they have not been able to explain. And sometimes the response has been that, you're crazy, rah, rah. Anyway, there's this big story in the US. There's been like this big cover up of very high kind of ranking people in the military and in the secret services and whatever, seeing these objects, and they've got footage and they've got eyewitness testimonies verified by many people. And the point is, they're not saying that there's a little man flying a spaceship, but they're saying there are things that come up into our skies that we cannot explain. They do not fit our frame of reference. So the word phenomena is good. Maybe this is something happening in terms of physics that we don't understand, but there are like things that are moving at high velocity and going in and out of water, and it's wild. If you're interested, there is a great documentary series on Disney, I think, called UFOs, and then some subtitle. But if you just look up UFOs on Disney, it's like a 2026 documentary. But it's almost undeniable at this point that there certainly are these UFOs, aerial phenomena that happen in the atmosphere of Earth that we don't know what they are. And then there's a lot of people that argue that the US government has hidden biological evidence of life, as well as evidence of spacecraft where they have actual, pieces and materials that are non-Earth substances. Anyway, you start to sound a bit crazy when you talk about this stuff. But to me...
I don't know what you're talking about, Will. Keep going.
Are you with me? Are we going down an interesting road?
How many subscribers have we just lost after that little...
Okay. Here's where, just in the world of speculative... I mean, I love a bit of speculative fiction, a bit of sci-fi, but in speculative theological territory, I actually think it's a really interesting question to ask. If the universe is as vast as we know it is, I mean, we can't know how vast it is, right? But we know it's enormously vast beyond our comprehension. If there's no other life apart from on planet Earth, what does that say about God? And if there is other life, and it rocked up here tomorrow, what would that say about God? And I kind of think most people don't really think about this, but they're actually both quite weird questions to think about, because if the universe is so massive and it's just us, that just seems weird. And what's the point of it all? But if the universe is so massive and there are other life forms out there, then that raises all these questions around, well, if there's an afterlife, does each planet just get their own afterlife? Like, would we be in heaven with aliens? Or if aliens rocked up here tomorrow, would they need saving? Would we need to evangelize them? Or if aliens rocked up here, is it possible that they're from a planet where they didn't have like a fall? And in C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, he kind of plays with this idea that, like there's different species that have different experiences. Anyway, I think there's lots here to discuss. It's interesting. It's nerdy. It's maybe not everyone's cup of tea. But have I asked any questions that have planted seeds in you of, that's an interesting thing to discuss at the pub?
This is 20-year-old me could not have had a conversation like this because I think I genuinely just held that human supremacy view, I think that was a product of my evangelical upbringing that like humans are just the center of everything, the pinnacle, the high creation, the whole point of it all, like, and the idea that there would be like aliens that may be equal or even superior, because most of the time in pop fiction aliens are definitely superior to humans in all kinds of ways. That just was an offense to my 20-year-old worldview. But these days, much beyond 20, there's plenty of space in my imagination for this kind of speculation and theological room to consider, like, yeah, definitely, what are the ramifications of this? Yeah. So open to the conversation is the shortcut to all that. Mitch?
I don't think I nerd out on it the same way that you do, Will. As in, like, you could see there was an energy in your voice as you spoke about that stuff that was so
I've been
cool.
waiting
Like,
for 250 episodes to talk about this.
It was so disarming to hear the energy in your voice, like, around it. I love that. So I don't. It's not something that I kind of spend a whole bunch of time thinking about. But I think also partly because I don't know. It wouldn't challenge any of my theology or my deeply held pictures about like how human beings fit into the cosmos or like God's intentions. Like I don't know how it would matter, like in a sense that like it wouldn't. I don't. If aliens exist, great. It'd be so interesting to try to understand like what they understand about the the nature of the cosmos or something. But I can't imagine it having some kind of catastrophic effect on like the story that Christianity is trying to tell, which is a uniquely human one in the sense that God becomes a human, but by no stretch is it saying this is the only thing that we have to know about the infinite God, right?
I'm going to just tell you right now, aliens exist because we live in a world where there are giraffes and there are zebras and there are, what are those fish with the light up thing down the bottom of the ocean? Anglerfish.
Oh yeah, they're amazing.
Now, I partly jest, but I think this does actually touch on, like Caro was saying, if your theology, and I think it's just a default part of being human and having an ego, we tend to think that the story is about us. But somebody in our faith community on Sunday morning was talking about birds, and they love birds, and they were saying there is this parallel universe around us that we just are so not attuned to, but the birds have their life alongside us. And it's quite, I think the question of just how we relate to other life forms, whether they come from other planets or they're on ours, and whether we have that kind of just sense of like the stories about us. Obviously, that to go right back to the earlier questions around climate, I think there's something about having a curiosity and a respect for other life and a humility about your own species that maybe is a good thing.
Mitch, did you ever have a time in your like younger years where the idea of aliens would have been confronting to your theology, or have you always sort of just been, I don't know what the word is, open?
I don't know, like not memorably. Like I certainly didn't grow up going, oh, if aliens exist, like maybe I'll like have to throw the whole thing in or something. Maybe I can vaguely picture a time thinking something along the lines of if you got a higher intelligence who suddenly came and said there's no such thing as God, that God doesn't exist, like whether that would be like some kind of evidence that you would have to like reckon with, where this super intelligent race or species of alien came and told you that you're all silly for believing this thing or something, right? Like that, maybe that was something that I spent a little bit of time like worrying about. But I don't know, like it's not something that stresses me out these days. Like I'm probably, maybe this is like some kind of hubris on my part, but if a super intelligent alien life force came and said there's no such thing as God, I would say, well, let's talk about it. Like walk me through it. Maybe I am, like but an ant in comparison to your intellect, but I still want you to convince me. So like here's the best we've got. For some reason this was popping up in my mind. I don't know why, but George MacDonald, when he's talking about writing great fantasy, right? He said all laws of nature and physics are all up for grabs. Like you can make anything happen in those books and it's totally fine. He says the one thing that you can't do though is mess with the moral law, because that will just be unintelligent to people. So if you start saying what is evil is good and what is good is evil, and meaning it not like as a thought experiment to imagine what a world would be, but you are trying to convince people that this is true, then like it just becomes unintelligent and not that interesting, and you just can't do it, right? Like people kind of don't let you do that in like fantasy fiction. So I wonder whether or not like a little bit of that would ring true for kind of alien life forms, right? Like you would imagine that if there is a God, and if God is good or goodness in and of itself, there's a sense in which like whatever beings out there would be beholden to the good, the true and the beautiful, like that is God, right? And that would be an important thing to kind of think through or to hold, that they don't get some like special pass because they have vast knowledge. The moral coherence would still have to hold. So I don't know if that is like a sensible thing to be thinking, but that's at least a thought that popped into my head when you said that. So
I just think, the vastness of the universe is obviously something we cannot comprehend in one sense. But I don't know if you've ever seen those things. I went to a museum last year where they had like, one of these things where you look at a picture of Earth and then you press a button and then it zooms out and you see Earth in the context of our solar system. And then it zooms out and you see Earth in the context of, the sun or the next kind of galaxy over. And very quickly Earth disappears. And then it goes to like these super giant stars, Betelgeuse is this one massive star, and it just keeps going. And if you can look up these sort of things and you feel this strange mix.
Are you talking about a Louis Giglio video, Will? I feel like that's what you're actually referencing here.
Damn it, Louis. Don't steal my thunder. Yeah, that's kind of funny because there's a way of just using that just to make a great, evangelical sermon.
Point. Yeah.
But I think it's I don't know, it's just a profound, it's if nothing else, it's a good way to like dose yourself in some humility. Like if there is a God has to be bigger than the universe. And if the universe is that big, then you're obviously an absolutely tiny speck. And if you're telling me that you heard clearly what God said, well, I got some questions, my friend. But the other thing that I would say is just that even if obviously some of us like this conversation just because we're sci-fi nerds. I can tell that's me, and maybe not everyone, and that's okay. But humans for so long have been fascinated by these kinds of questions around whether it's life from other planets, whether it's multiverse stuff, or simulation theory, which I mentioned to you the other day, Mitch. Have you heard of simulation theory, Caro?
No.
Do you want to have your mind blown?
Well, I wanted to ask, did you feel the same way about like quantum theory and stuff like that? Like you're talking about expanding out to the universe beyond, but what about going down into I don't know, maybe that's where the aliens are, in the quantum realm.
True. There might be tiny alien civilizations in my microphone here that I don't even know about.
Tell me about what was it? What was it called? Suspension theory?
Simulation theory.
Simulation theory. Okay.
Now I know that some people might go, this has nothing to do with the real world. We should get back to talking about like climate change and stuff that matters. But I think there's something about human imagination that's a very important part of spirituality, and that actually what speculative fiction or hypothetical questions like this, they stretch our imagination to expand, which can only mean expanding how we think about the big questions about God and life and love. So simulation theory is the idea that we currently live in a reality where it is the trajectory of our technology tells us that it's certainly possible that somebody could be in a hyper realistic world that is not actually real. So if you put on virtual reality goggles and, we just advance our technology just a little bit further, you could be in a world that you can't distinguish from whether it's real or simulated.
Like the Matrix.
Yeah, basically the Matrix. As soon as you know that we live in a world where that's a possibility, then you have to go, okay, there is the possibility that we are in a simulation right now. And then the statistical, again, you go, there's all the vast universe that we live in, there's all these other planets, civilizations. A lot of people that buy into this would say it's very likely that we are in a simulation statistically. And the only way that we're not in a simulation is we're either the first reality ever, we're base reality, which if there's like billions of simulated realities, then it's unlikely that we're the base one, or we're the most recent reality that's just about to start simulating the next one. And we're in, the line of simulations goes way back. Which just makes your brain explode a bit. But there are people that genuinely believe, and they just go and live their life, obviously. They just go and live their life in the world as they do. But there are genuinely lots of people that will go, it's actually very, very likely, it's more likely than not that we are just in like a big video game or a big matrix. How does that challenge your ideas? Then God would be the previous universe simulating us.
Yeah, I think like there is a sense in which like you start to rub up against like what is real in that kind of equation, right? Like what is reality and what actually exists, and isn't like our current reality is really only just a perception we have of like some stimuli that seems to be outside us, but it's not even outside us, it's really inside us. So like even just in a pure kind of like cognitive sense, all of reality doesn't exist. It only exists in our minds. It only exists because we perceive it, which is why that aphorism about if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, like did it ever happen, or did it even really happen, is actually just such a more interesting question than what you think, because our only access to anything that happens is through our sense of it, using our senses. So in that kind of like simulation type thing, you just end up in this position, well, what is real anyway? Why is this reality not more? Why is it less real than the previous one? When really the only access that anyone had to the previous one is through the same kind of mechanisms that we're using now, right? So it's kind of predicated on some physicalist assumption that the only thing that really is real is like the physical world that is around you, which doesn't even really exist anyway, because it only exists through our perception of it.
Mm.
I don't know. I just found something to say to you. I didn't know what to say to your simulation thing, so I just started talking and decided to see what would come out.
Do you guys know about our good buddy René Descartes? Are you familiar with the French philosopher? He's famous for...
I know the name.
I think, therefore I am. This was his... Yeah. What a lot of people may not know, I studied him in my first year, philosophy subject at uni. And so he basically was a good Christian of his time. And he went, I want to just doubt everything. This might be interesting to people that like, deconstruction and doubt. But he literally set himself a project. He's like, what can I know for sure? I'm going to doubt and suspend my belief in absolutely everything and then see what I can have certainty in. So anyway, he writes these meditations and he basically goes, actually, as I get down to it, the only thing I can be certain of is that I have some existence because I have a thought life. I can't prove that the world around me is not just, a dream or a simulation or whatever, but I do have some reality in that I have thoughts. I don't know if you're real. You might be part of the big dream, but I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I exist. And that's it. That's like, okay, that's all I can be certain of. Then he does this interesting move that is what you can debate in a first year philosophy class, is because he was a Christian and he wanted to prove the existence of God. He basically then builds up this picture and he goes, because I think I'm going to butcher this, but his argument for the existence of God is basically that if he has an idea of the good and the beautiful and it must exist and a God wouldn't kind of deceive him. And so therefore, because he has this like deep idea about the good corresponding to some sort of reality, God has to exist because the good has to. I did a terrible job of that. But most people go, I think, therefore I am is legit, and everything else he does after that doesn't really prove anything. But he was kind of like, I've built my way back to God, and because I've got a belief in God, then I can trust the universe. I'm not being deceived, and I've kind of got it all back again. Anyway, we're going long here, but we can wrap this and leave my weird philosophical world.
If we're never going to touch aliens again, my only addition, I was saying this to you, Will, the other day when you were talking about this topic, I have come across a few essays where people have made this interesting argument, where they say that like fixation on aliens and UFOs and stuff is like a pretty Western phenomenon. Like it's not like it doesn't happen anywhere else, but it's mainly in the United States. Wouldn't you go figure? It's mainly in the USA, but it's like very specifically Western. And one of the kind of hypotheses, I can't prove this is just an essay that I read, right? One of the hypotheses is that in other parts of the world, they have like epiphenomenon or something, or they have these things that happen, but they just don't immediately go to like aliens. They think demons or angels or spirits or kind of ancestors, right? So they have very similar experiences of something that's beyond like explanation or current explanation, but they just don't name it as aliens because they have a far more kind of enchanted world. So one of the kind of suggestions from people who write these essays is that because we live in like a purely mechanistic materialist kind of frame, when we come across that stuff, the only like language that we have to talk about it is, it just happens. It has to be another kind of material substance that's appearing from a different planet, and it's from a different planet because it's not known here, right? So that's the hypothesis. But in other places, they see all that stuff all the time, and they're like, oh, sure, angel, spirit, ancestors, like, were communicating to me or something. But then another interesting thing I came across about this that like kind of reinforces this a little bit is people experience this stuff apparently in ways that are like make sense to them. So like we have like flying, like we have evidence of flying, sources like, or UFOs like way back in history, but they used to have anchors. It'd basically be like a ship, like, so they would experience, a ship in the sky. Right. And now like we have lights and, I'm going to assume these things were lit up because they saw them, but like we have space travel, and so we kind of experience them as that. And in one sense, you could say, well, therefore they're all made up. But in another sense, you could say, actually, maybe this phenomena there's always been a subjective element to it. It needs to cohere or make sense to you, and to you in ways that are real to you, right? So I have a bit of time. That was the one like unique contribution I thought I would have to the alien conversation is these
when you said
if
we never touch aliens again, my heart broke a little bit.
Alien.
It was not prescriptive, it was descriptive. I'm just describing what might happen, but I don't want it not to talk about it again. But
you know what I want to say, just if we are wrapping up, is just like follow the joy, people. Like, you guys didn't get to see Will's face when he started talking about aliens, but it lit up. Like,
it did.
And I think that whether we're living in a simulation or whether or not we're in the real world, whether God's got a whole nother universe in the quantum world or on some other planet far away, like, I think for me it's just like, let's live the joy. Like, this life as we experience it is good, beautiful, and I think there should be joy in our thinking and joy in our living and in our bodies. And this conversation has just made me this afternoon just want to be like, follow the joy. Like, enjoy the things that you love, do deep dives on weird topics, share them with friends, have conversations. And if that's aliens, that's awesome, but that might also be giraffes or magpies or roof lines or I don't know, whatever it is.
I love. We got to do an episode on roof lines.
I do actually have it. Like, when I see a complex roof line, it does excite me. There's one as I drove out to my parents' house, and I'm like, I don't know how roofers like connected all that up. Every time I see it,
what does that say about God, though? What? Give me the theological significance of the roof line.
I love it. I think that's a great place to end, Caro.
I think connected to that is just to not take ourselves too seriously. There's just an element of playfulness, enjoy. That is a beautiful thing. Hopefully that aliens don't arrive tomorrow and like extinguish our civilization. Hopefully they come to play board games with us.
Exactly.
And they are also nerds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you guys watch? Did you watch Hail Mary?
Yes.
Not yet. Yeah. Keen to.
If you want to just like have warm fuzzies for an alien, just go and watch Hail Mary. It's so lovely.
It's like, That's why
I will.
you won't get my like rock people alien thing, because that's like that's from Project Hail Mary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you'll.
All right.
You'll watch it. You'll love it. Yeah, it'll give you good feels.
Our kids loved it.
Yeah, mine too.
I reckon. Yeah.
Well, when you came over for dinner the other week, Caro, and we're talking about Lord of the Rings, inspired our family. We just watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy the last couple of weeks with the kids. What a rite of passage! They loved it. It was so good.
So good. I don't know what number watching we're on, but every winter school holidays is usually the Lord of the Rings marathon.
Let's just give a shout out to Samwise Gamgee on the podcast here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
the
if you want a
hero.
model for what it means to be a good human or hobbit or alien, be like Sam.
Yeah.
Samwise, where it at?
Excellent. All right. You guys are awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
for having this fun
Peace,
conversation.
Fill
Goodbye,
out the
Spiritual
survey,
Misfits.
people.
Yes, fill out the survey. Links in the show notes to various things mentioned in this episode, or you have, 2 hands and a keyboard and you can just Google stuff. All right.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.